So first off, thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting us.
So for those that don't know you, tell us who you are, your background, and how you got involved in the Alden House.
Well, my name is Desiree Mobed, and I am the executive director of the Alden House Historic Site. I've been there since 2016, so coming up a few years now for sure. So I have been in the museum field for a number of years as administrator and director of other sites. And history is just a great love, and being able to share it and get kids excited about it. That's always been my goal. I've never thought it's challenging to teach history in school, but I find when you bring kids to a site and you get them engaged and you get them doing things and they understand that it's the story of people and the choices they made, all of a sudden, you just see that light bulb come on. And, you hope that that's something that stays with them.
The executive director title, we've had a lot of executive directors on this podcast, and that's a really vague title because executive director at one organization does something completely different than another one. So what's the executive director role for the Alden House? What does that consist of?
So I think if we filled this room with hats, you might be able to, figure out all the different jobs that these many executive directors do. And, I always say it's a lot of fun to get into a room when you're with a lot of them and just hear all of the stories and the things that have happened. But basically, you're the point person for, interpreting the property, preserving it, in the case of a museum, doing educational programs, fundraising, and of course working with our board. It's got many hats. Sometimes I show up thinking, okay, I've got my list for the day, and then something will happen and it's a whole different list that
list changes dramatically and gets pushed to next week.
Yes.
Great. So for those who don't know, what is the Alden House?
Oh, yes. Well, the Alden House Historic Site, as we call it, is the family homestead of Mayflower passengers John and Priscilla Alden, who came over from England in 1620 with that group of intrepid 102 passengers. They eventually married and had 10 children. And as history sort of likes to leave off with the Pilgrims at Thanksgiving. They haven't even quite finished that wonderful meal that they were celebrating with their Native American friends. But then it sort of races to the American Revolution. Right. And the Alden House really represents that story of really what they did next, what their dreams were for building a new world. And it's, we are very fortunate to have the site. It's one of the few existing Pilgrim family properties that remain. And it's something that can be visited by the public, so they can walk to the site of the 17th century home, 400 square feet of it, where John and Priscilla spent decades, and then tour what became the second family homestead, built probably in the late 17th century, expanded and lived in by the family to the 1920s. So we offer tours, educational programs, events, and it's a wonderful site. It just resonates with people in so many different ways. Partly because it's real. It's something where you can walk in those footsteps. If you're an Alden descendant or not, and just enjoy this one of these stories about America.
Wow. So, mission. What's the mission of the organization?
So the Alden House Historic Site is owned and operated by the Alden Kindred of America. And that's an organization that was formed toward the early of the part of the 20th century by Alden descendants. And they, as one of their goals to preserve the legacy of John and Priscilla Alden, purchased the family homestead from the family. So it had been lived in by the family and was lived in until about the 1920s. But they purchased it and want to preserve it and
Wow.
share it with the world. And they have since opening it probably about the 1920s as a museum.
Why is the organization so special to you?
So John and Priscilla sort of became, the celebrated, famous pilgrims when one of their descendants, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, published a poem about a family story that he probably had heard because he's also an Alden descendant. And it's called The Courtship of Miles Standish. Even in the days before, things go viral like we think of today, the courtship poem it just became an overnight phenomenon. Everyone loves a love story, yes. So, John and Priscilla became the famous pilgrims after the publication of a poem called The Courtship of Miles Standish by one of their descendants. Just happened to be Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So John and Priscilla became the famous pilgrims after the publication of the poem The Courtship of Miles Standish, which was written by one of their descendants, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Maybe he'd grown up, hearing this family story of a love triangle with the military commander Miles Standish, who supposedly was interested in the young Priscilla. His first wife had died during that first horrible winter, so he was looking around. And but instead of, and a lot of our teenage guys can so relate to this, instead of doing his own courting, he mistakenly sent John Alden to do his courting for him. And we all know how that usually ends up.
Yes.
And this was no different. So Priscilla famously said, "Speak for thyself, John." And, the rest they say is history.
Yeah.
But that poem became an international bestseller. And, it was even read in schools and it was quoted, and it became just the "speak for thyself" line becomes part of the American culture.
Yeah.
So, but, the Alden House is, what interests me so much about it is that the story is so much more than that. You have this young couple. I mean, Priscilla had endured horrific losses that first winter. They were in Plymouth. She lost her entire family.
Wow.
She's an orphan. She's 18 years old. John, who's a young cooper, there weren't that many men who survived that first winter. There were probably about 20. So,
Wow.
And a lot of their leadership was gone. So that young generation, indentured servants, artisans, tradesmen, had to step up.
Wow.
And they did. And they made it happen, and they made it work. So that story of theirs, they married, they had 10 children. He became one of the leaders of the colony. They built this, wonderful home that exists for us today, which people can, still see some of the artifacts from that home and walk the grounds. So it's a very, very special story about, an American dream.
So what are the organization's most urgent needs?
Oh, my goodness. Well, like with any nonprofit, it always starts with funding.
Yeah.
And we, are funded through our annual fund. We're funded wonderfully by our generous members. And we also get a number of grants. Some of the organizations are South Shore, good South Shore partners like the Rockland Trust Charitable Foundation, and the South Shore Playhouse Associates is a new one. We also have support from the Duxbury Cultural Council, and then of course Massachusetts Cultural Council has been super supporters. But in addition to funding, of course, it's always about the people, and small organizations like ours rely heavily on volunteers for support, to run programs, to just help with the gardens, to help, with educational events. It really runs the gamut. We have a annual haunted house event, which is now part of the South Shore tradition. It's been 21 years of this event, which has grown over the years. But, it takes about 50 to 75 volunteers over a 2-day span to make it happen. And we get a lot of students. It's essentially student supported. And some of them even came from Marshfield this year to help us with the dramatic programs. But between volunteers and funding, certainly we couldn't do it without either.
So I'll jump to volunteers. So is there a best way for someone to volunteer or get involved?
Oh, yes. So we do have a website, which people should check out. We also are on Facebook,
Awesome.
Some of the other social media platforms, Instagram and YouTube. But, we need volunteers. We have a cadre of adult volunteers who help with our programs. But we also really like to involve the youth.
Okay.
We have internships with Duxbury High School and Bridgewater State University. We also work with the scouting organizations, National Honor Society. And so people should just contact us. If they have an interest, we have a spot for them.
Okay. So there's no specific, but definitely a push for youth.
For youth, yes. Yeah, very much enjoy just involving, children and teenagers in this site.
Cool. So as we both know, the nonprofit world can be, it's rewarding, but at the same time can be really challenging. What's the biggest challenge you faced with Alden House?
Well, other than resources, of course, as a small museum, that is, always a very pressing need. I think the biggest challenge, which we're working toward, is how to tell this story for the next generations. Things are changing, the world is changing, and museums have to change with it. Our board has been working very hard on to develop and engage in a capital campaign with the goal of building a Center for Living History. And this, we're very excited to be able to share that this building is going to break ground early in 2024. Cool. So coming up in the next few weeks. It's been project that's been in the work for several years now, and it's certainly a significant commitment. But through this Center for Living History, we will be able to tell the Alden and the Pilgrim story and this part of early Duxbury and the South Shore in new ways, with technology, but also with increased opportunities for hands-on. This is a house museum, and people love learning about how people lived long ago. And one of the parts of this Center for Living History will be a working kitchen. And who doesn't? That crosses all age groups and all cultures. Everyone loves, to experience how, people cooked and ran their houses a long time ago. So that will be part of it.
You mentioned earlier, you're talking about Plymouth 400, and there's a lot of historical organizations, houses, societies in this area. How much collaboration is there between all the different houses and groups?
Yes. So those of us with the Pilgrim stories certainly, work together on different programs. But we have a wonderful program, or we will have a wonderful museum network for the South Shore museums. And that is very active. We meet regularly. We work on a number of different topics. We share professional development advice. We share, challenges of running museums, but we also offer a symposium usually every spring,
cool.
And it, on different topics. Some of it has been, of course, on Plymouth 400, but now it's on the Revolutionary War because, we're on Revolution 250 right now. And so, people can stay tuned for some of those really programs to come.
What's been the most rewarding thing or even the most successful thing, with Alden House?
So, the capital campaign and actually breaking ground is going to be one of the, it's just, knowing that we're this close, watching, the site being prepared is certainly, it's just making it very real. And knowing how much work has gone into it is huge, but also, solving or working toward goals on preservation. We have some issues with our chimney, and we recently had a mason come we've had actually several masons and structural and engineers. It's quite a team. I think working towards solving some of those preservation issues is, as a museum, it really makes you feel like you're taking the house forward for the next, couple generations. Right. And also the third goal is really the archaeological story of this house. I mean, it's hugely important. In addition to the standing house, we have, there's a foundation of the Alden's original 400-foot, basically, house, and from it, thousands of artifacts, which for the 400th anniversary, we created a professionally curated exhibit. So that would share it on a much bigger way, because it's really a unique, one-of-a-kind collection. And we're very pleased to partner with yet another one from the South Shore, wonderful curator, Stephen O'Neill. So, that in and of itself has just been, a huge undertaking, and, something that we continue to develop.
So you're out in the community a lot, you're engaged with a lot of different groups and organizations. What's that one thing that people say, oh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know about that with Alden House?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that it is the fact that it is the oldest, the family has owned this site for over 400 years, almost 400 years now, and that's the longest stretch of time in America that we know of. Yeah. And people, because America, this country's always on the go, and for the Aldens to have been able to hang on to a piece of that heritage since 1627 is really amazing. And people are really, they sort of look at you and they think, wow, that is kind of cool.
That is cool. And, last but not least, as we wrap up, is there anything else you want our listeners to know about the Alden House?
Oh, well, certainly this is a place that we want, we invite you to visit. There's so many ways to enjoy it. The grounds are open year-round, and we have an audio tour. The house is open seasonally, like many in New England, because it's a bit chilly in there in the winter. And we offer a variety of programs. We have, I guess one of the silver linings to come out of COVID is we've all learned about, hosting programs online. So in the winter months, we offer that opportunity. This is a site that people from around the world come to visit. So I hope, people on the South Shore will really come and visit and enjoy it, because it's a huge part of how the South Shore began.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast, and I want to wish you the best of luck with the capital campaign. That's really exciting stuff.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yes, stay tuned.